The small town of Willowbrook was a place where everyone knew each other's names, and the streets were lined with familiar faces. It was a community where nothing ever seemed out of place, where the air felt safe, and the days moved at a steady pace. Among its residents, there were a few who stood out more than others, and one of them was Coach Eric Matthews. Eric had been the head coach of the Willowbrook High cheerleading squad for several years, and during that time, he had become something of a local hero. His presence at the school was commanding, but in a way that made people admire him rather than fear him. He was tall, with a strong build and a warm smile that seemed to make anyone around him feel comfortable. His dedication to the squad was unquestionable, and the cheerleaders loved him. At the heart of the team was Emily Harris, a bright and talented cheerleader who had been with the squad since her freshman year. Emily was the embodiment of grace and strength. She was beautiful, with long, flowing brown hair and eyes that sparkled when she smiled. Emily was everything the town admired, perfect in every way. She excelled academically, was the captain of the cheerleading squad, and had a personality that made her adored by both peers and adults alike. Her parents were proud of her, and she was the kind of young woman that everyone expected great things from. Yet, as perfect as she seemed on the outside, something was brewing beneath the surface, something that no one could see, not even her closest friends. Eric had taken an interest in Emily from the moment she joined the squad. Her raw talent had immediately caught his eye, and he knew she had the potential to be the star of the team. It wasn't just her cheerleading skills that impressed him, though. It was the way she carried herself, confident, driven, and always eager to learn. Eric found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. He had been a coach for years and had seen many talented athletes come and go, but there was something about Emily that seemed different. It wasn't long before their connection grew stronger, and their professional relationship began to evolve into something much more personal. It started with small gestures, casual conversations after practice, sharing a coffee at a local diner, and a few private words of encouragement that lasted longer than they should have. To the outside world, it appeared as nothing more than a coach helping his most talented athlete. But in the quiet moments they shared, it became clear that there was something deeper between them. Emily, too, felt the pull. She was flattered by Eric's attention and genuinely enjoyed his company. Over time, their conversations became more intimate, and what started as a professional connection soon became something more. They found themselves meeting in secret, their interactions growing more frequent as they shared moments of vulnerability. Emily began to confide in Eric about her personal life, about the pressure she faced both at school and at home. Eric, who had been a father figure to so many of his students, now appeared to offer a different kind of guidance, one that was far from innocent. As their connection deepened, Emily found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unsure of where the boundaries of their relationship lay. What had started as a simple coach-athlete mentorship had blurred into something that neither of them could control. They were both aware of the danger of their relationship, but neither could seem to pull away. Meanwhile, the people around them remained oblivious. The cheerleading squad continued to perform flawlessly, and Eric continued to be praised as the dedicated coach who led them to victory. Emily remained the perfect captain, always smiling, always the star. But underneath it all, the secret they shared was becoming harder to keep, and the consequences of their actions would soon be impossible to ignore. The search for Emily Harris grew more desperate with each passing day. As her absence stretched into the second week, the town of Willowbrook began to sink into a collective state of anxiety. Emily had been a beloved member of the community, intelligent, vibrant, and full of promise. She was a role model, a cheerleader whose smile lit up the room. Her disappearance felt like a cruel twist of fate that no one could fully grasp. Friends, family, and even strangers rallied together to search for her, posting flyers, organizing volunteer teams, and keeping hope alive. But despite their efforts, the search yielded nothing, and the police were no closer to finding her. Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Harlow were assigned to the case. At first, it seemed like a typical missing person investigation. Someone had gone missing, and they had to figure out where she had gone and why. However, as the days wore on, it became evident that Emily's case was anything but ordinary. The more the detectives spoke to people who knew her, the more they began to uncover troubling details about Emily's life, things that didn't quite add up. One of the first places the detectives focused on was the cheerleading team, where Emily had spent most of her time. The squad was a tight-knit group, but the more the detectives spoke to the girls, the more a sense of unease emerged. Emily had been acting differently in the days leading up to her disappearance. She had withdrawn from her teammates, becoming distant and preoccupied. It was out of character for someone who had once been the glue holding the team together. Her friends noticed that she had become increasingly agitated, always glancing over her shoulder, as though she feared something or someone was watching her. The detectives soon learned that Emily's behavior had been tied to one person, Coach Eric Matthews. Eric was well known in Willowbrook, not just for his role as the cheerleading coach, but also for being a charismatic figure in the community. He was respected and admired by many, often seen as a mentor to the young girls on the squad. But as Sarah and James began to dig deeper, they started to uncover a different side to Eric, a side that was far more sinister. They found that Emily had been spending a lot of time with Eric in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. It wasn't unusual for a coach to spend extra time with a dedicated student, but the nature of their relationship raised red flags. Emily had become closer to Eric than she had with any of her teammates. She had started to confide in him about personal matters, and Eric, in turn, had taken an unusual interest in her well-being. Some of the cheerleaders recalled instances where Eric seemed overly protective of Emily, intervening when other team members tried to get too close to her. His behavior towards her had become possessive, and Emily had seemed to become more and more uncomfortable with it. The detectives' suspicions were further fueled when they found a series of text messages between Emily and her best friend, Lily, in the days before her disappearance. Emily had been sending cryptic messages that hinted at something being wrong. "I don't know what to do anymore," one of the texts read. "He's making me feel like I'm losing control." The messages were filled with fear and uncertainty, and it became clear that Emily had been struggling with her relationship with Eric. It seemed as though she was trying to break free from him but didn't know how. The detectives also discovered that Emily had been planning to confront Eric. She had confided in Lily that she was going to tell the truth about their relationship, whatever it was, and expose what she felt was an unhealthy dynamic between them. The day she disappeared was supposed to be the day Emily planned to confront him. She had gathered her courage, determined to put an end to the secret she had been keeping. But something had gone terribly wrong. The investigation into Emily's disappearance had taken a dark turn. Sarah and James had found their first real lead, but it wasn't enough. They still had no clear idea of what had happened to Emily after she left her house that night. The only thing they knew for certain was that something had happened between her and Coach Matthews. As the detectives continued to follow the trail of evidence, they couldn't shake the growing feeling that Emily's disappearance was just the beginning. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface of the town, and they were about to uncover it. The deeper they went, the more they realized that Emily's murder was not an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger, more sinister story, one that had been hidden for far too long. The town of Willowbrook had never seen anything like it. Emily Harris, the star cheerleader, was missing. The day after the cheerleading team's final competition, there was an eerie silence at the school. Students wandered the hallways, talking in hushed tones, while faculty members exchanged worried glances. Emily had been a fixture in the town, always at the center of attention, always in the spotlight. But now, she was gone without a trace. It started with the phone calls. Emily's mother, worried when her daughter didn't return home after practice, began calling her friends and teammates. No one knew where she was. She wasn't answering her phone, and her social media accounts had gone silent. As the hours passed, concern turned into panic. By the time evening came, Emily's family had reported her missing. The police began to search the area, hoping for some clue as to where she had gone. But the search didn't lead them anywhere. The longer they searched, the more hopeless the situation seemed. It was as if Emily had simply vanished. The cheerleading team, who had always been a close-knit group, began to fall apart. They were devastated by the news, unsure of how to process the disappearance of their beloved captain. No one could comprehend how someone as vibrant and full of life as Emily could simply disappear. The girls tried to stay strong for each other, but they were consumed by fear. Emily had always been the one who held the team together, and now, without her, they felt lost. Days turned into weeks with no sign of Emily. The investigation seemed to stall as the police scoured every possible lead. Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Harlow took over the case, determined to uncover the truth behind Emily's disappearance. Their first step was to trace her last known whereabouts. They discovered that Emily had been last seen leaving the gym late one evening, around the same time that Coach Eric Matthews had finished his practice with the team. At first, the connection seemed insignificant, but as they looked deeper into the footage, something unsettling caught their attention. Eric Matthews, always a charismatic and well-liked coach, had been seen leaving the gym just minutes after Emily. There was no sign of anyone else around, no one to witness what had happened in those critical hours after practice. The detectives dug further into Eric's background, and what they found began to raise alarms. Eric had a spotless reputation in the community. He was known for his commitment to the cheerleading squad, and he was well liked by the students and their parents. But the more they looked, the more they began to uncover. There were rumors of inappropriate behavior, whispered conversations about the coach's unusually close relationships with some of the cheerleaders. No one had ever come forward with solid evidence, and the accusations had always been dismissed as baseless gossip. But as the investigation into Emily's disappearance deepened, the detectives started to wonder if there was more to these rumors than anyone had realized. The breakthrough came when the police discovered Emily's phone hidden in the woods, not far from the school. It had been destroyed, but forensic experts managed to recover some deleted messages and photos. One message stood out, a text sent from Emily to a close friend just hours before she vanished. The message was brief but chilling. "I'm scared. I can't keep this secret anymore." The detectives were stunned. What secret had Emily been referring to? And why had she been afraid? The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but they still lacked the crucial piece that would explain her disappearance. As they continued their investigation, the detectives began to suspect that Emily's relationship with Coach Matthews had crossed a dangerous line. The connection between them was undeniable, and the more they uncovered about their secret meetings and the tension between them, the more it became clear the young cheerleader's disappearance was no accident. The question now was whether Emily had truly run away, or if she had been silenced to protect a dangerous secret. The truth was out there, but it was slipping further away with every passing day. The murder had yet to be committed, but the detectives knew the worst was yet to come. What they didn't know was how close they were to unraveling a dark, twisted truth, one that would shake the town of Willowbrook to its core. As the investigation into Emily Harris's disappearance progressed, Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Harlow uncovered more disturbing details that painted a chilling picture of Coach Eric Matthews. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that Emily's secret relationship with Eric was not an isolated incident, and that her murder was only the culmination of a long history of manipulation and control. Eric's calm exterior and reputation as a beloved coach had shielded him from suspicion for years, but beneath that facade was a man capable of dark deeds. The detectives began to piece together the timeline of events leading up to Emily's death. They learned that Emily had been growing increasingly uneasy about her relationship with Eric. She had started confiding in her friends about her fears, telling them that Eric had become obsessive and possessive. She had tried to distance herself from him, but it was clear that she had found herself trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. Emily had confided to one of her teammates that Eric had begun showing signs of jealousy when she spent time with others, even going so far as to question her about her relationships with other boys. This control, combined with his charm and manipulation, had made it nearly impossible for Emily to break free. She was constantly torn between her fear of him and her desire to escape his grasp. The more the detectives learned about Eric's behavior, the more they realized that Emily had not been the first to feel his suffocating influence. They began to hear from other former cheerleaders, some of whom had been too afraid to speak out before. They described how Eric had a pattern of befriending vulnerable, impressionable girls offering them attention and praise, and slowly drawing them into his web. He made them feel special, important, and irreplaceable until they became emotionally dependent on him. Several girls admitted to having been in inappropriate relationships with Eric, though many had ended the affairs when they began to realize the unhealthy nature of their interactions. But by the time they had distanced themselves, Eric had already moved on to his next target. The detectives' breakthrough came when they discovered a hidden stash of emails and messages on Eric's computer. There they found disturbing communications that revealed Eric's obsession with Emily and his fear of losing her. The messages between the two were laced with a mix of affection and control, with Eric constantly attempting to manipulate Emily into staying close to him. He expressed his anger when she tried to distance herself, accusing her of betraying him and threatening to expose their relationship if she didn't comply with his demands. These messages were like pieces of a puzzle that showed just how far Eric had gone to control Emily. He was no longer the charming coach the town had known. He was a man who would go to any lengths to protect his secret, even if it meant resorting to violence. The detectives also uncovered a string of phone calls and text messages exchanged between Emily and one of her close friends in the days before her disappearance. Emily had told her friend that she was planning to confront Eric and end their relationship once and for all. She had grown tired of living in fear, and she was determined to expose him for what he truly was. Emily's final message, sent hours before she vanished, read, "I'm going to meet him one last time. I have to stop this before it goes any further." It was clear now that Emily had made up her mind. She had been ready to break free from Eric's grip, but her plans had been thwarted by the one person she trusted. The day after Emily disappeared, Eric had tried to cover his tracks. Surveillance footage from the school showed him leaving the gym that night, his face impassive as he walked to his car. He looked calm, almost too calm, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But the detectives knew better. The evidence they had uncovered pointed to one simple truth. Eric Matthews had killed Emily Harris to keep his dark secrets hidden. He couldn't let her expose him, not when so much of his life was built on lies and manipulation. The detectives were closing in on Eric, but they knew that they had to be careful. They couldn't afford to make a mistake, especially with a man like Eric, who had managed to hide his true nature for so long. As the investigation continued, Sarah and James knew that they were on the brink of uncovering the truth about Emily's murder. But they were also painfully aware that the final piece of the puzzle was the most dangerous one of all. Eric Matthews was a man who would stop at nothing to protect himself, and they were about to learn just how far he would go. The investigation into Emily Harris's murder had reached a devastatingly intense point, and Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Harlow could feel the weight of the case bearing down on them. The more they uncovered about Coach Eric Matthews, the more they realized the depth of his manipulation and the twisted web of lies he had woven to protect himself. What had once seemed like a promising case was now an all-consuming quest for justice, one that revealed the darkness hidden beneath the surface of Willowbrook's seemingly perfect town. The key to unraveling the case lay in the shocking discovery of Emily's final moments. The forensic team had managed to recover more data from Emily's phone, including several deleted text messages that revealed her growing fears about Eric. One text in particular stood out. "He's not who you think he is. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to tell everything." It became clear that Emily had made the decision to expose Eric for what he truly was, a man who had manipulated not only her but several other girls over the years. She had gathered the courage to speak out, to reveal the truth, but she had never been given the chance to follow through. Emily's attempt to confront Eric had likely been the trigger that led to her murder, the night she disappeared. The detectives found irrefutable evidence that Emily had met with Eric in the gym. Surveillance footage captured the moment she entered, and the tense interaction that followed spoke volumes. Eric had been caught in a lie, and he could not afford to let Emily walk away with the power to ruin his carefully constructed life. The footage revealed a struggle, something Emily had not anticipated when she walked in that night. In the heat of the moment, Eric had snapped. His rage, combined with his desperate need to preserve his reputation, had driven him to commit the unthinkable. As the detectives continued to piece together the timeline, they realized that Eric had been planning Emily's murder long before that night. In the months leading up to her death, he had been increasingly controlling, obsessively checking her whereabouts, sending her threatening messages, and using his position as a coach to exert influence over her every move. Emily had tried to break free, but each time she made an attempt, Eric tightened his grip on her, manipulating her with promises of protection and false affection. The deeper they dug into his past, the more disturbing details they uncovered. Eric had been using his role as a mentor to prey on young girls for years, grooming them, isolating them, and then discarding them when they no longer served his purpose. But the discovery that shocked Sarah and James the most was the growing list of victims who had never spoken out before. As the investigation progressed, several former cheerleaders came forward, sharing their stories of manipulation, fear, and abuse. Some of the girls were no longer in Willowbrook, but they all spoke of the same pattern. Eric would win their trust, offer them support, and then exploit their vulnerability. For some it had started as innocent admiration, but over time the line between mentor and manipulator had blurred. The detectives learned that Emily had been among the few who had started to see Eric for who he truly was, but by then it was too late. She had tried to expose him, but the dark truth had cost her everything. The final piece of the puzzle came when the detectives found a hidden stash of incriminating evidence in Eric's office. His personal journals contained detailed accounts of his affairs with various girls on the cheerleading squad, including Emily. The notes were chilling, revealing how he had methodically kept track of his control over them, using threats and emotional manipulation to keep them in line. Eric's behavior was not just a series of random acts, it was calculated, methodical, and fueled by his overwhelming need for power. In those journals, Sarah and James found the truth they had been searching for. Eric had been grooming Emily for years, and when she had finally decided to break free, he had done everything in his power to prevent it. The arrest of Eric Matthews sent shockwaves through the town. The coach who had once been hailed as a hero was now exposed for the predator he truly was. As the case moved to trial, the victims of Eric's abuse came forward, their voices finally heard. The trial was a painful process for Emily's family, but it also brought a sense of closure. The town, which had once trusted and adored Eric, was left reeling from the betrayal. They had allowed a predator to hide in plain sight for years, and Emily had paid the ultimate price for it. Eric Matthews was convicted of first-degree murder and multiple charges of abuse. His fall from grace was swift and final, as the truth of his actions was laid bare for the world to see. But for those who had been affected by his manipulation, justice didn't bring the healing they had hoped for. The damage had already been done, and the lives he had destroyed could never be repaired. The small town of Willowbrook, once peaceful and serene, would forever be marked by the dark legacy left behind by a man who had used his position of power to manipulate, control, and ultimately destroy the lives of innocent young women.